What if Einstein's greatest insights weren't about physics, but consciousness itself? In his final years, the genius who rewrote the laws of reality contemplated something even more profound. What happens after death? The distinction between past, present, and future is only an illusion, Einstein declared, hinting at a scientific understanding of immortality that terrified religious authorities and baffled fellow scientists. His revolutionary perspective on the soul, drawing from quantum mechanics, energy conservation, and higher dimensions, offers a stunning alternative to both religious dogma and strict materialism. Einstein's quantum perspective on consciousness, Albert Einstein, despite his reluctance to fully embrace quantum mechanics in its most probabilistic aspects, developed profound reflections on the nature of human consciousness that are rarely discussed in mainstream scientific contexts. While widely known for his famous objection that God does not play dice with the universe, few are aware of his contemplations on how human consciousness might interact with the quantum fabric of reality. In private conversations that only came to light decades after his death, Einstein considered the possibility that consciousness wasn't merely a byproduct of biochemical processes, but a phenomenon fundamentally connected to the quantum laws governing the universe. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift, Einstein observed, suggesting that our mechanistic understanding of consciousness might be overlooking fundamental aspects of its true nature. In personal notes discovered in his archives, Einstein questioned whether the quantum observer, whose observation apparently collapses wave functions into defined states, might be a manifestation of something deeper in the fabric of reality. Einstein speculated that perhaps consciousness operated at a level where the deterministic rules of classical physics didn't fully apply. Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one, he once said, indicating his suspicion that a materialist perception of mind might be fundamentally incomplete. He considered the possibility that consciousness could be an emergent property of energy that follows different rules than those governing ordinary matter. Particularly intriguing was Einstein's suggestion, in correspondence with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, that there might exist a complementarity principle between mind and matter, similar to the wave-particle complementarity principle proposed by Niels Bohr. This would suggest that consciousness and physical matter might be complementary, aspects of a more fundamental reality, each incomplete on its own, but forming a whole when considered together. The field is the only governing agency of the particle, Einstein wrote, and in his more speculative reflections, he considered whether consciousness might be an aspect of this fundamental field that permeates all space-time, manifesting locally, through brain structures, but not fundamentally limited by them. This perspective would open fascinating possibilities regarding the nature of consciousness after physical death, suggesting it might persist in some form not yet understood by conventional science. This quantum view of consciousness, while speculative, represents a fascinating starting point for contemplating how the human mind might transcend the physical limitations of the brain, paving the way for Einstein's other aspects of theory about the soul and afterlife, energy conservation, and the human spirit. Albert Einstein's revolutionary equation, E=mc2, fundamentally transformed our understanding of the physical universe by establishing the equivalence of mass and energy. Yet few realize how deeply Einstein contemplated the implications of this principle for human consciousness and what we might call the spirit or soul. In conversations rarely discussed in mainstream scientific literature, Einstein explored how the conservation of energy might apply to the essence of human awareness and identity. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another, Einstein frequently emphasized when discussing the first law of thermodynamics. This fundamental principle led him to question what happens to the energy, patterns that constitute our thoughts, memories and personalities at the moment of physical death. If energy cannot be destroyed but merely transformed, then what transformation might occur to the energy that manifests as human consciousness? In a lesser-known letter to the family of a departed colleague in 1955, Einstein wrote, "Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That means nothing. People like us, who believe in physics, know that the distinction between past, present and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." While often cited in discussions of Einstein's views on time, this statement also hints at his speculation that consciousness might transcend conventional temporal boundaries, suggesting that death might be less final than it appears from our limited perspective. Einstein's perspective on consciousness was influenced by his holistic view of physics. In a 1940 conversation with Rabindranath Tagore, he remarked, "There are two different conceptions about the nature of the universe. One, the world as a unity dependent on humanity. Two, the world as a reality independent of the human factor." This duality extended to his thinking about consciousness, where he considered whether human awareness might be both an emergent property of physical processes and simultaneously connected to something more fundamental in the universe's structure. The famous physicist approached the question of what happens after death from a uniquely scientific perspective. Our limited minds cannot grasp the mysterious force that moves the constellations, Einstein once reflected. This humility before the cosmos informed his speculation that the energy patterns constituting human identity might persist in some form beyond physical death, not through supernatural means, but through natural processes not yet fully understood by science. Einstein's views diverged significantly from both conventional religious notions of an afterlife and strict materialist positions that consciousness simply ceases at death. "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind," he famously stated, suggesting that a more nuanced position might be necessary. Time as an illusion and its implications for mortality. Albert Einstein's revolutionary work on relativity fundamentally transformed our understanding of time, challenging the common-sense notion that time flows universally and equally for all observers. The distinction between past, present and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion, Einstein famously wrote in a letter of condolence to the family of his lifelong friend, Michel Besso. This profound statement wasn't merely a scientific observation, but carried deep philosophical implications for how we might understand mortality itself. Einstein's conception of time as a dimension, rather than an absolute flow, opens extraordinary possibilities for reconsidering what death truly means from a cosmic perspective. The core of Einstein's insight was that time is relative. It flows at different rates depending on factors such as gravity and velocity. Through his equations, Einstein demonstrated that time and space are interwoven into a single continuum, space-time. In this framework, all moments past, present and future exist simultaneously in what physicists sometimes call a block universe. For us believing physicists, Einstein wrote, the distinction between past, present and future is only an illusion, however persistent. This perspective suggests that our perception of time as a linear flow might be a limitation of human consciousness rather than a fundamental aspect of reality. When applied to our understanding of mortality, Einstein's view of time carries remarkable implications. If all moments exist simultaneously in a higher dimensional reality, then death might not represent an absolute endpoint, but rather a boundary within the larger fabric of space-time. Now Besso has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me, Einstein continued in the same condolence letter. that means nothing. People like us, who believe in physics, know that the distinction between past, present and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. In this light, death becomes a transition point in a continuum rather than an ultimate ending. The deceased person's life continues to exist as a complete entity in space-time, even though we can no longer interact with them from our limited perspective. Einstein elaborated on this concept in discussions with his colleague Kurt Gödel, who had developed mathematical models of universes where time travel would be theoretically possible. Since there exists in this four-dimensional structure, space-time, no longer any sections which represent now, objectively, Einstein noted, the concepts of happening and becoming are indeed not completely suspended, but yet complicated. It appears therefore more natural to think of physical reality as a four-dimensional existence, instead of, as hitherto, the evolution of a three-dimensional existence. This suggests that our experience of aging and eventually dying might be better understood as navigating a fixed path through a space-time landscape that already contains our entire existence from birth to death. Some of Einstein's more philosophical reflections touched on how this perspective might offer a form of cosmic consolation in the face of mortality. In a conversation recorded by his assistant Ernst Strauss, Einstein mused, "For those of us who believe in physics, this separation between past, present and future is only an illusion, albeit a convincing one. The implication is that those we have lost to death continue to have real existence in regions of space-time regions we cannot currently access, due to our limited perception, but which are no less real than our present moment. The interconnectedness of all matter and energy. Albert Einstein's quest for a unified field theory, though ultimately unfinished, represents one of the most ambitious scientific endeavors of the 20th century. While the physics community today largely focuses on his completed achievements in relativity and quantum theory, Einstein himself dedicated the latter decades of his life to finding a single mathematical framework that would explain all fundamental forces in the universe. This pursuit wasn't merely a scientific exercise, it reflected Einstein's deeper philosophical conviction that the universe operates as an integrated whole rather than a collection of separate elements. "I want to know how God created this world," Einstein once remarked. "I am not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts, the rest are details." This holistic vision extended beyond conventional physics into Einstein's contemplations on consciousness and its place in the cosmos. In what might be his most quoted statement on human interconnectedness, Einstein wrote, "A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness." This perspective suggests that our perception of ourselves as separate entities might be a necessary but ultimately misleading aspect of human experience, what Buddhist traditions might call Maya or illusion. Einstein continued, "This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." Einstein's unified field theory work provided a scientific parallel to this philosophical position. If all forces, electromagnetic, gravitational and nuclear, could be shown to be manifestations of a single underlying field, then the apparent diversity of physical phenomena would represent variations of a more fundamental unity. In private conversations with colleagues like David Bohm, Einstein extended this concept to consciousness itself, suggesting that individual minds might be localized expressions of a universal field of awareness. The true value of a human being, Einstein wrote, is determined primarily by the measure and the sense in which he has attained liberation from the self. This statement hints at his intuition that transcending our sense of separate selfhood might connect us with something more fundamental. The implications of this perspective for understanding what happens to consciousness after death are profound. If our minds are not isolated phenomena, but connected aspects of a universal field, then physical death might not represent the absolute termination of consciousness, but rather a transformation in how that consciousness is localized and expressed. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another, Einstein noted. And if consciousness is understood as a particular organization of energy, then its conservation in some form becomes a logical inference. Einstein articulated this interconnected view of reality most clearly in his exchanges with Indian philosopher Rabindranath Tagore. During their conversations, Einstein acknowledged, "If there is any truth in the Upanishads, it lies in the recognition that all things, including consciousness, are interconnected expressions of the same underlying reality." Einstein's critique of religious afterlife concepts, Albert Einstein maintained a complex relationship with religious thought throughout his life, consistently rejecting anthropomorphic conceptions of God while expressing profound reverence for the natural order of the universe. His views on traditional afterlife concepts followed a similar pattern, critical of literal interpretations, yet open to deeper philosophical meanings behind religious metaphors. "The word God is for me nothing more than the expression and product of human weaknesses," Einstein wrote in his famous God letter of 1954, "the Bible a collection of honorable but still primitive legends." This statement encapsulates his skepticism toward conventional religious narratives, including those concerning the afterlife. Einstein particularly objected to the notion of an afterlife designed around human rewards and punishments. "I cannot imagine a God who rewards and punishes the objects of his creation," he stated, "whose purposes are modeled after our own, a God, in short, who is but a reflection of human frailty." This critique extended to traditional conceptions of heaven and hell, which Einstein viewed as anthropocentric projections rather than cosmic realities. In conversation with Rabbi Herbert Goldstein, Einstein elaborated, "I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fates and actions of human beings." This Spinozistic perspective left little room for conventional afterlife narratives centered on human moral judgment. However, Einstein's critique of religious afterlife concepts did not lead him to embrace pure materialism. "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind," he famously observed, suggesting that both perspectives, when taken to extremes, result in incomplete understandings of reality. In his essay, Religion and Science, Einstein elaborated on this middle path. The interpretation of religion, as here advanced, implies a dependence of science on the religious attitude, a relation which, in our predominantly materialistic age, is only too easily overlooked. This nuanced position allowed Einstein to reject literal religious afterlife narratives while remaining open to the possibility that consciousness might transcend physical death in ways not yet understood by science. Einstein's critique focused particularly on the self-centered nature of many religious afterlife concepts. "The true value of a human being is determined by the measure and the sense in which they have obtained liberation from the self," he wrote. This suggests that fixation on personal survival after death, the continuation of the individual ego, might represent a spiritual limitation rather than an enlightened perspective. Instead, Einstein proposed a more cosmic view. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. Einstein also criticized the psychological motivations behind religious afterlife beliefs. The desire for guidance, love, and support prompts men to form the social or moral conception of God, he wrote. By extension, afterlife concepts often serve to assuage death anxiety rather than represent cosmic truth. In a 1949 letter, Einstein noted, "I have repeatedly said that in my opinion, the idea of a personal God is a childlike one. You may call me an agnostic, but I do not share the crusading spirit of the professional atheist. I prefer an attitude of humility corresponding to the weakness of our intellectual understanding of nature and of our own being." The fourth dimension and consciousness beyond death. Albert Einstein's revolutionary work on relativity fundamentally transformed our understanding of space and time, revealing them to be aspects of a single, unified, four-dimensional structure known as space-time. This reconceptualization of reality has profound implications not just for physics, but for how we might understand consciousness and its potential persistence beyond physical death. Since there exists in this four-dimensional structure, space-time, no longer any sections which represent now, objectively, Einstein wrote in a letter to Michel Besso's family, "The concepts of happening and becoming are indeed not completely suspended but yet complicated. This complexity opens fascinating possibilities for considering consciousness as potentially operating in dimensions beyond our immediate perception." The concept of higher dimensions had captivated Einstein throughout his scientific career. His theory of general relativity demonstrated how gravity could be understood not as a force acting across distance, but as the curvature of four-dimensional space-time itself. Einstein often used analogies involving lower-dimensional beings to illustrate how limited perspective creates apparent mysteries. A being living in a two-dimensional world, he explained during a lecture at Princeton, would have no concept of the third dimension. Similarly, we may be limited in comprehending higher dimensions that nevertheless exist and influence our reality. This analogy provides a framework for considering consciousness as potentially extending beyond the dimensions we directly perceive. Einstein speculated that human consciousness might operate partly in dimensions beyond our immediate physical senses. Just as a three-dimensional object casts a two-dimensional shadow, Einstein suggested our physical lives might be projections of a higher dimensional existence. "Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one," he famously remarked, suggesting that our perception of consciousness as exclusively bound to three-dimensional space plus time might be similarly limited. In conversations with mathematician Kurt Gödel, Einstein explored how this perspective might imply that death affects only the three-dimensional manifestation of consciousness, while its higher dimensional aspects remain unaffected by physical termination. This geometric approach to consciousness aligned with Einstein's broader philosophical outlook. "Our separation from each other is an optical illusion of consciousness," he wrote in correspondence with Queen Elizabeth of Belgium. This statement suggests that the apparent boundaries between individual consciousnesses might be artifacts of our limited dimensional perspective rather than fundamental reality. Just as separate circles on a plane might be cross-sections of a single cylinder in three dimensions, seemingly distinct consciousnesses in our experience might be manifestations of a unified awareness in higher dimensions. Einstein drew conceptual parallels between his space-time geometry and the nature of consciousness in several unpublished notes. If consciousness is fundamentally a field phenomenon rather than a particle phenomenon, he hypothesized, then it may extend throughout dimensions we cannot directly perceive, just as electromagnetic fields permeate space beyond our immediate detection. This perspective offers a scientifically grounded alternative to traditional concepts of the soul, suggesting that what we experience as consciousness might exist in a more complete form in higher dimensions, with our brain functioning as a receiver or translator rather than the generator of awareness. If this glimpse into Einstein's forbidden theories fascinated you, hit subscribe for more mind-expanding content that mainstream science doesn't want you to see. Drop a comment with your thoughts on consciousness surviving death. Einstein might have agreed with you. Share this video to challenge someone's perception of reality today.